Welcome to a season one special episode of the podcast A Surprise. Tonight, I am joined here by Michal and Aziz. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to actually be recapping and reviewing, breaking down everything that you need to know about The Witcher season one. And why is that, guys? Is there something coming up this month? Something that we might have been waiting 2 years for?
It seems kind of random, actually. I thought we just figured this Saturday, the 4th December. Yeah, Witcher Season 1 day. That's it. There's no Season 2 coming anytime soon, is there?
No, I don't think
so. It
doesn't
feel possible that it could, but...
Yeah.
At one point, we had discussions that we might not even get a Season 2 with all the... some fantasy shows don't make it, but it seems that this fantasy show is going to make it. So I think... that we're all pretty happy that that's going to be happening.
Indeed, we are. We made it.
So welcome, everyone who's joining us this evening. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday night. The kind of cool thing that we're going to do, I think we'll probably go through everything chronologically, I guess. We'll go episode by episode and kind of talk about a little bit about the differences from the books in the show. We can definitely do that. We have some notes on that, some fun Easter eggs. Of course, we'll talk about all the best moments. And I think it's, if you can kind of see the ticker up here, you can see that we have a podcast called The Podcast Surprise. We like to plug our own podcast because we think we're awesome. But if you enjoy learning about The Witcher, you can check us out on anchor.fm, The Podcast Surprise. And we've actually covered the first 2 books, which a lot of these short stories were covered in season 1 as kind of like origin stories or kind of like opening stories for all of these different episodes. We are going to get one of those for sure in season 2 with a grain of truth we know in episode 1. But we're going to focus on season 1 today, and that's what we're going to kind of talk about. For everyone that's joining us, we do have 2 versions of the podcast. Like I said, this live one, which you come listen to us live and comment in chat. Let us know what you're really enjoying about The Witcher, whether you're listening, whether you're reading, whether you're watching. And then we also have the podcast version, which is kind of a labor of love of ours. We started, I believe, right when the pandemic first started, so it's really fun that we've made it this far, and now we're getting into main novel territory, so that's going to be super fun. But so guys, let's talk about it.
Let's do. What about, like, to start off would be fun maybe to discuss, like, how, I know we've talked about how you recruited me here, but Michal, what was like your first experience with The Witcher and watching the show and all that? That'd be kind of neat to hear, I think.
So I got into this by accident. I'd heard, everybody was talking about it on Twitter, and I was like, I hadn't heard about it before it started, I don't think. And then I was like, isn't that a video game? It's a TV show from a video game? Like, what? Yeah. And then I don't know why exactly, but like, I think I was just, I can't blame the pandemic. It was before the pandemic, but I was just like, all right, it's 8 episodes. There is a certain appeal, I guess, to when you are a fantasy fan and you're a fantasy reader, when something comes out and you haven't read it, to just kind of be like, I don't care if they've changed everything. I'm just going to see if I like this thing. So I watched it and I didn't understand it at all. But it was
a lot of people didn't. A lot of people didn't because of the multiple timeline stuff. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, it was the timelines. Yeah, which in retrospect, whatever. But then and of course I was seeing people talk about like, oh well, this is actually only like the first 2 books, and it's like really the short stories, and I was like, I'm never gonna read that. And then here I am. So, season 2, I have no way of being like, oh, it's fine. If they changed anything. I mean, it is fine. They can change whatever they want, but I will definitely be a lot more aware.
Well, you did make a good point, Michal. The Witcher 3 is one of the best-selling video games of all time and has, I believe, 36 million copies sold, which is up there, I believe, in the top 10 for video games other than Mario and stuff like that. So for that type of video game to get up there, we're talking like, games like Last of Us, Resident Evil, those type of games, and Witcher is up there in the best games ever sold. So there's already this huge fandom behind it, especially in Eastern Europe, where CD Projekt Red had made this game. And then, of course, some of these video games now are being picked up and turned into series. Like, look at Halo. Halo is going to become a series. But The Witcher has these great books behind it. It has this great story that's completely finished. And that's kind of what me and Aziz started talking about.
Yeah, that's right. You know what's funny is whenever you say the word series when you're talking about The Witcher, it's like, what series? What? Her sword? Her green eyes? It's like, wait.
Series. Yes.
Series. Yeah, series. No, you said it right. It's just kind of funny. But yeah, I agree with y'all. The timeline definitely was a little confusing. What's funny, though, is really sitting down to analyze this. I noticed a few things. Yennefer and Ciri's stories are pretty linear. It's Geralt's story that jumps around, which is funny because that's the one that's the most linear in the books, or at least linear enough that you don't notice because, well, you don't notice because it doesn't matter, because you don't have Yennefer and Ciri to care about early on. They're not in the novels right away. So it does make a lot of sense. The structural changes they made, some of them were by necessity, and some of them were just trying to make more sense, make it flow better, and to have things be connected. Because I think that's one thing it did really well, was looking at it episodically, kind of like how we did with the short story. You study each short story individually, and you see like the themes and the connections and all the things that come out. This also is happening in episodically, though, right? Within each episode, there's a lot of powerful themes, some more than others. But they do that really well here, while also including a lot of Easter eggs. That's one thing I noticed in particular, rewatching it again. Now that we've gone through the books and done a really thorough look at the first two short story books, watching the show again enabled me to catch a few things, things that I didn't catch the first time that were like, oh yeah, I didn't, that line, because there's so much happening. You can't possibly catch it all. So it really made me feel like Lauren Hisrich and her team were trying pretty hard to keep book readers happy. And sometimes you have to look hard to find those things, but they are there.
And it's crazy because before we even started this podcast, I had approached Aziz, and Aziz is obviously ultra popular with Song of Ice and Fire, huge success with History of Westeros. And I said, hey, Aziz, we should probably team up for this. There's going to be 7 seasons of this. There's going to be a lot to talk about. And you haven't read it yet. I feel like I know a little bit more than you. So for once, I know and might know a little bit more. But we had some fun conversations, and I kept pestering Aziz. And it turns out that after a couple of flights, Aziz had read 5 books. And I said, holy crap. Okay. And that's where we are now. I think, we talked a little bit about after season 1, how many people picked up the books, and they were sold out on all the different Amazons and bookstores. So obviously people are really invested in the story now. The Netflix people are creating what I like to call the Witcherverse, with the Nightmare of the Wolf, the Blood Origin prequel, and a whole cast of content they're going to be dropping for The Witcher. So it's a really exciting time to be a fantasy fan. Like I said, we don't always get what we want with fantasy shows, but it seems like this one is going to be one that sticks. They got really big names. They're telling the story right. When you got someone like Lauren Hisrich, who's literally going on Reddit and chatting with people, having conversations with people like us that like to banter, that's a pretty good sign for someone that's going to be dedicated to telling a huge story like this.
Which is interesting of itself, I think, because it's like looking at, like, reading the books and looking at it kind of objectively and what they did with the show, and, having come into it not knowing anything, I'm still a little surprised it's as popular as it is. Not that it's not good, but like, it's dense, it's confusing, it's dark, both literally and like visually, and it's an interesting thing to have kind of caught the public imagination. But it's interesting how that happens. I'm glad it did.
I agree too, but it's funny. I have the same I'm surprised this is doing so well. Like, I'm not surprised it does well, but as well as it did, being number 1 for Netflix for a while there.
And it even surpassed The Mandalorian. I did Google tracking, and it had more views than The Mandalorian, which is
I'm not sure it really did, because The Mandalorian wasn't worldwide, but that's whatever. It did really, really well. Anyway, point being, I think that's also true for the video game. Maybe the RPG, it's also really dark and has a lot of story. It's pretty dense for a game, but I think that's maybe part of why it did so well, because people want that, and there wasn't a lot of that out there. There wasn't a lot of, RPGs aren't quite that strong a lot of times, So
I mean, we talked about the veracity. I mean, Michal mentioned the veracity of the Nightmare of the Wolf, how we were surprised at how graphic the opening of that was. But that's the world of The Witcher. That is the dangerous element of living on the continent. I think that they have to showcase that, and that's part of Sapkowski's story, whether it be gruesome or not.
So it's interesting, and I don't mean to get us down a total rabbit hole, but I'm watching The Wheel of Time, and I think it'll be interesting to compare those two, because that's also been picked up for a second series, and it's also going to be 8 episodes, and to kind of see, you know, where it falls on kind of the zeitgeist and popularity, if it grows, if it flails and collapses, like it'll be interesting to compare the two, because I do think that they're very different stories, but there's a similar, you know, high fantasy, doesn't give a shit if you don't want to hear about vampires and Trollocs and like all this like really intense like castles. It's unapologetic fantasy. So I think it'll be really interesting to compare those two.
Before we move forward, I do want to point out that Morally is throwing some coins to my favorite YouTuber. She says, love you guys. I'm looking forward to The Witcher season 2. Us too. We've talked about it a lot behind the scenes, kind of just in like our friendly chat. We have our own kind of Facebook group where we chat, and we're like, the trailers look really good. The cinematics, of course, they got a new VFX team. I believe it's the same team that does The Mandalorian and some of the Marvel movies. And that was kind of one, I think, big thing for critics. You know, they're the Golden Dragon and some of the other things. They thought that, you know, Netflix could have poured a little bit more money into that, and well, they did. They have a much larger budget. Not saying that makes or breaks the show for me, because I thought, you know, the quality of the acting was really good, but yeah, that definitely helps when you got more moolah to put into good looking things like leshies and whatnot. So Aziz will be joining us back here in a second, I believe. Michal, not Dandelion. Before we jump into breaking down season 1, there were so many great elements in short stories. Would you say that you enjoyed the adaptations? Did you think they were faithful enough with what they did in season 1?
Yeah, so I've been somewhat paying attention to the fact that they updated some of the short stories and, you know, added more female characters, gave female characters more agency, a lot of stuff which was already kind of possible within the story. Like it just in the first episode, like Marilka, you know, the girl who kind of becomes Geralt's like snarky guide in the village, is, you know, she's mentioned in the story. She's not like a complete invention, but like, yeah, I do think that they made it more. I think they took from Sapkowski's later ethos and kind of adapted the earlier work into, you know, some of the earlier stuff that he had created.
Yeah, I agree. There's like a lot. I think it starts off with Destiny right away. Like Destiny episode 1, boom, you're talking about it right away. But that's not really that early of a thing in the books. It certainly comes up huge, but not right away. Mm-hmm. It's mostly like it starts off with just there's this guy, Geralt, who's the Witcher, and the world expands around him. And then all of a sudden we have more important characters and it gets huge and vastly more interesting and detailed. But yeah, like he didn't start off with all that. So that's another reason it makes sense to restructure some things and hit the ground running with these important ideas, not just to introduce those characters, but yeah, the things this is all about needed to be introduced as well. And that's a good example.
This will be the only Game of Thrones comparison I make tonight, but the thing I actually love about adaptations when they go to TV too is that we're going to get a lot more screen time for some of these characters that don't necessarily get a ton in the books. Like some of these other Witchers we're going to see in season 2, we're going to get to know them a little bit better, because there's a pretty large span of time where some of these characters don't show up, and I don't think that for the show, I don't think they're necessarily going to kill off these characters, but I think it's important that if they're going to become popular characters, that they get more story told. And we had a lot of characters like that in Game of Thrones, and I think that's also going to apply to The Witcher, where we're going to have some characters that are having more screen time and having more story fleshed out. And I think that's a good thing to have differences from the
Yeah,
to
like
the
for
show.
example, Stragobor is
Mhm.
in one story in the entire novels, but he's apparently going to be a significant part going forward. He's part of the Brotherhood of Sorcerers and all that. So that's pretty important.
Yay.
Yeah, we love him. No.
We all hate Stragobor.
Fan favorite Stragobor.
It is funny. It's we should point out the what we talked about offline just a minute ago. I didn't realize that was Mad Mikkelsen's brother. That's Stragobor is Mad Mikkelsen's brother, Lars. So that's cool. We were just talking about he's the same last name, but I didn't know that was him. So should we just start with that? That's the first episode. Should we dive right in?
Yeah, the first
Cool.
one. What's the episode title?
It's called The End's Beginning, and it's pretty much the lesser evil. If you follow these stories along in terms of Geralt's perspective, they correspond 1-to-1 with short stories. Now, Ciri's perspective and Yennefer's perspective, very different. Stuff is like I said, more linear within itself, but not as corresponding to the short stories, where Geralt's stuff is mixed up a bit more, but follows the pattern of the short stories just in different order. So, for example, I love the beginning, even though there isn't any real tension in moments like that when there's a fight and it's the main character, like he's obviously going to be fine. But it was neat to show it was an homage right from the get-go. You have a little deer, which at first I didn't get it, but on reflection, this is a little nod to the short stories and to the Witcherverse being rooted in fairy tales. That's supposed to be Bambi. That's Bambi getting killed in the first few seconds. So it's like, hey, these are fairy tales, but they're kind of dark because we're killing Bambi right out the gate. And then it moves into a cute little girl who just talks about murdering dogs for money. So it's kind of dark, but I thought that was kind of neat, even though it is dark. It's still kind of funny, like black humor, I guess, dark humor. There's a couple of funny jokes that refer to the short story. And some that refer to the world in general. There's a great line like, because I'm a girl and girls can't be witchers, right? Like, oh, nice. Because that's setting a little something up, isn't it? And then right away, we get the anti-Witcher sentiment. We got, the people hating mutants. That's kind of, if you've watched like the X-Men or read X-Men comments, it's kind of familiar because it's even the same terminology, hating mutants. And I love the line, I killed a rat this morning with my breakfast fork. She says that, Marilka does. And that's a nod to the books because Geralt, when he's having dinner at the alderman's house, he throws a fork to kill a rat that no one could even see. and the alderman's wife is very unhappy that he did that. So I thought that was a good little joke. What else, guys?
Michal? Okay, Michal's there. Perfect. Yeah.
Sorry, I have to keep blowing my nose. I'm going to spare you guys from that. So that's why I'm disappearing.
I felt like episode 1 was a pretty good adaptation of the short story. I felt like I was pretty satisfied by that.
Yeah, she even does that thing with her skirt, doesn't she? Where she like lifts it up and wraps it around her arm or something. It's
makes it into a part of her weapon. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah. But so if I'm wrong, correct me, but I think this story kind of starts like The Witcher, right? With him coming into, like, a man walks into a bar and everybody's like, fuck you, and he's like, blah. And then and then it kind of transitions into the lesser evil. Yeah,
that would have been the third episode if they had corresponded. But you're right. That's the first short story has this intro basically. But
the man who walks into the bar is kind of iconic, to be honest, because Geralt does some bad things there.
Of course, he doesn't actually fight anyone in there, and it just they act like they want to fight him, but and then
he could have chopped all their heads off if he wanted to.
We've discussed how that's, like, in retrospect, kind of out of character for Geralt to just slaughter people.
Yes, so being rude. It's good that they dropped that, probably, because it was kind of like, what's this all about?
And it's also not like we're like thirsting for a fight scene in this episode.
Yeah,
we definitely get
Yeah, a really good one. Yeah. So speaking of that, I think we may have mentioned a little of this before, but this is where it's most relevant. That was originally going to be, instead of the actress who plays Renfrey, whose name I forgot to, Emma Appleton, I think is her name. Is that right? It was going to be Millie Brady, who was Ethelfled in Last Kingdom, but because of reshoots, she wasn't available. And there was a small thing I would criticize about the reshoot, which is they didn't make her blonde, because it's important for her to be blonde, because Stragobor even says golden crowns, like this the path to Lilith will be paved by 60 women in golden crowns, which is supposed to mean blonde hair, right?
Blonde of hair, yeah.
And the stunt, there's no picture of Millie Brady in costume, but there is a picture of her stunt double, and she did have blonde hair. So they were going to do that originally, but for some reason this actress, they didn't like how she looked in blonde hair, or I don't know, they just decided not to. It's a very small thing.
That would have provided a nicer contrast to show that like there's something going on with blonde-haired women, like Ciri obviously being very blonde, and Renfrey also being blonde. But I also think that like the change too, I felt like it was still tragic no matter what. It's like, oh man, like Geralt's like, don't you dare touch her body. You know what I mean? That was so powerful. Yeah. You could tell how pissed he was. He's like, I'm not letting you do anything to her body, even though she's dead. Even though we just had the disagreement and I had to kill her, I'm not letting you touch her. Like that.
Yeah, he's not saying, he's like, this doesn't mean you were right. Mm-hmm. It does not mean, he's like, you don't take these bodies to mean I agree with you,
But it would have been interesting to see, maybe if they, she did have blonde hair, kind of like a cut scene, like, because you know how you can jump POVs. That would have been kind of interesting to kind of give the show watchers subtle hints that someone of blonde hair was special and magical and that kind of deal.
I do wonder if that might have just been, if it might have been that simple, and that like audiences can be dumb, and like we don't want to confuse them with too many blonde people in the opening episode of like, I mean, they're in two different plot lines, so I don't. Maybe it wouldn't have been, but like. It I feel like sometimes networks think like that it's just like too many blonde women,
It is years later. You're right about that.
That's a good point. That is a good point. So that's a good pivot to talking about Ciri. It's pretty straightforward, her story version here, in terms of what comes from the books, except that we see it instead of having most of it implied. That's a big part of Ciri and Yennefer's story in season 1, is things that were implied in the books but not shown on screen actually get shown. In Yennefer's case, some of these things aren't explained till way later, but they're all origin story stuff, so it makes sense to talk about now. For example, in Ciri's case, we talk about the Destiny stuff right away. When Ciri has like this moment of like showing a little magic when they're trying to make her flee, and Mousak goes up to her, Calanthe's like, yo, did you see that? And she's like, I saw it too. She's the reason they're here, right? That is a thing that's not nearly as drawn out in the books. They're making Nilfgaard more fanatic about this prophecy, instead of it being just a thing that only a few of them know about. It's like the whole, like it's been spread to the army. They're all fanatic about the white flame, and they make it seem like Nilfgaard was kind of a mess before the white flame took over. And you know what I mean? Like they show that, they laugh at that one Nilfgaardian suitor in episode 4, and talk about it like it's a crap hole or whatever, which that's a little different from the books, but it ends up in the same place. Nilfgaard is really powerful and they're invading, and a big part of that is the white flame, but it's just a lot more. It's not subtle. The white flame stuff is like, we're all about that,
It's gonna be interesting to see where they go with this character without spoiling too much. Apparently, there's a rumor we might actually see this character in season 2. We don't see this character till much later in the books, so that's kind of a thing that I'm
gonna lose my shit if that happens. It's gonna be so crazy.
I think it would actually be good. I think it's gonna be like a last episode type of thing, maybe like last scene of the whole season. I actually think it would be crazy, because holding out on that character for a long time, I think because we have such a long wait in between seasons, right? And introducing this, this antagonist, this huge antagonist in the story is going to make a big impact. But I actually like the idea of them becoming more fanatical in the show, because it really depends on how they showcase this person's lust for power and magic. Because I think that reading that and seeing that in a show is very different. So You can see the expression on someone's face and all of that. So I'm gonna be really interested to see how they pull that off.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense too to do it because you can't keep it a secret forever. The more people that read the books, you just better just to get it out of there, before like people get spoiled.
And I think it can
outside of the show, which would that would suck.
It can create a lot of tension in between season 2 and season 3. People will be maybe even more invested into getting the books too. You know what I mean? And I think it would be an interesting decision to do that. If they do that, I wouldn't be opposed to it, to be quite honest.
I mean, I won't get too specific in case of spoilers, but I do think it's worth saying that, there's a female character involved in that plot line who could definitely, I think, use the lore and historic treatment in terms of giving her story more screen time and more, just more presence.
Yeah. More on that, more on that side of things. I agree with you. That would be really good. And Kyle, I agree with you about like how they're going to do it, like having it be like a last episode kind of thing. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's not the only possibility, but I think I'm with you on.
It creates hype, right? Like, because we've had such a long wait, and I think season 2 will be good because we're going to meet characters like Vesemir. We're going to get to go to Karamor, and we're going to get these political issues that we're going to be grasping onto. And I think people are really going to like those elements that were I don't think that they weren't there in season 1, but they weren't the focus. And I think they really come to focus in season 2. So I think that, I mean, I'm not saying the whole kind of whole tone of the show will shift, but it's definitely going to shift in a big way. I think it's gonna
more
shock
politics, more intrigue, more of the world gets involved.
I actually think it's a good thing, to be honest.
Yeah, totally. Let's move on to the next episode. But a couple of quick fun notes, just little tidbits that I enjoyed that are worth mentioning. Okay, so we all know Sapkowski has a great sense of humor, and we love to talk about that. And I like to point out when that sense of humor makes its way into the show. So I was looking for things like that. And one of the first things I noticed was Stragobor looks like a wizard. Remember how that was a joke in the book? Like, no, of all the wizards in the world, like most of them don't look like one, but this guy looks exactly like a stereotypical wizard. I don't remember how it was written, but I laughed so loud when I read that line for the first time. And here he comes in he looks like a fantasy wizard. He's got a staff. He's got a beard. He's old, he's
There's
got
apples.
The apple is a reference to Cinderella, which is great. That's the poison apple and all that. So that was another nod.
Also,
there's a lot of
some people don't know that Stragobor is hundreds of years old. So
yeah,
he's definitely a wizard.
Yeah, right.
Gandalfian. He's a Gandalfian.
Blessing us with his presence for hundreds of years.
Yes, right. Yeah. So,
I'm never gonna let go of this. He's so terrible.
The imagery in that
him or Nivellen. He's worse than Nivellen, isn't he?
He's worse than Nivellen.
He's way worse than Nivellen. Nivellen experiments on girls.
He literally experiments on people. He's terrible.
I have a list. I have a mental list, and
maybe we'll get to see some more of his past. That might be interesting.
Maybe. One great line though that's important, and I'm really glad they spliced it with Ciri because it's a really good like theme and pattern and parallel work. Is Stragobor says she has the power to destroy the world, and Geralt says I don't believe that kind of power exists, and then you go over to Ciri and she just like screams and opens a fissure in the in the ground without knowing what she's doing. Like, that looks like that might be able to destroy the world. I'm just saying. So
that seed was planted for sure.
But the last line, Stragobor has a really good line. It's the one, I think it might actually be the last line of the episode, or at least the last line of Geralt's plot in the episode is, "You made a choice, and you'll never know if it was the right one." Like, ooh, damn, that was a dirty thing to say to Geralt because that's exactly what he's thinking. Like,
well, it burns at Geralt too because Geralt was a man of inaction for so long, and he finally chooses his destiny. Eventually, we see at the end of the season. So that's a thing that's going to be a constant thread that we're going to see, this push and pull between those kind of two sides, right? So because that's a great way to end it, I think.
Yeah. I think episode 1, having rewatched them, I think it's one of the best. It's definitely maybe not the best. I don't like choosing a favorite, but it's strong.
I put a poll in the YouTube chat. You can only choose 4 options, and I put that as one of the options. I felt that was
okay.
I think it's in my top 3 or 4 episodes. Definitely in my top 3 episodes of the season, I think.
Right on. Well, let's go to number 2.
Yeah.
So a lot of Ciri origin stuff is being dealt with in number 1. It moves over to our first introduction to Yennefer. She gets a fairly thorough origin story start off, and it continues throughout the next several episodes, which is nice because in the books it's more of a piecemeal thing. Like I said a few minutes ago, some of Yennefer's origin stuff isn't tackled till very late in the books. You kind of like some of her stuff with Tissaia comes out way later. So it makes sense to put it earlier. I'm obviously not criticizing. I actually think it's maybe better to do this way. And another thing that's really interesting is the way Shard of Ice, a lot of the stuff from Shard of Ice is in these episodes, but it's spread out. Whereas a lot of these other short stories are kind of one-to-one relationships. Something more Sword of Destiny rather is spread out. It's a lot of series stories, just something more kind of spread out. Or Sword of Destiny rather, when she goes to Brocklon and all that. And then same with Yennefer's is kind of spread out, like Shard of Ice plus backstory. Because you get this Istrid relationship, which is a big key to Shard of Ice. Mm-hmm. And speaking of Stragobor and characters who are more prominent in the show, Istrid is a character going forward. So we're going to see more of him, unlike...
There's lots of him in the trailer too, so that's exciting.
Yeah, I like that.
There's lots of him in the first season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry, I'm just remembering the applause scene. It was
yeah, that was weird.
Stuck with me.
But it does kind of set up the one in Last Wish, which is like, oh, okay, that's still kind of weird, but it's at least it makes more sense. Because like with Ciri's story, we're told it just kind of offhand with a few sentences, like, yeah, she spent all this time with refugees. She like pretended to be someone else. She didn't talk for a while. She was hunted, all these other things. So we're just seeing that instead of being told that it happened, which, it makes a lot of sense because you get to see a little more of the interplay of Cintra, like the people who hate elves and the people who are crappy to their halfling manservant or slave or whatever he is, and bringing out like Calanthe being more harsh to elves than she was in the books, and that's a major theme of this episode is the elven refugees versus Cintran refugees versus all 3 stories talk about elves being pushed to the brink. You got Edge of the World, which we know from the story is the deepest of that. Then you have Ciri kind of back and forth. She doesn't even know Dara is an elf yet. And then, but you have this one angry refugee boy who's got a necklace of elf ears, right? Like, whoa. But you also can't feel too bad for, like, you also kind of understand, like, this guy's brother was killed by elves or something. But you also find out that the cleansing, Filavandrel's uprising, was put down by Calanthe. And that's different from the books. So there's a much deeper resentment between Cintra and the elves than is present in the book. So that's important.
It's going to be really interesting too, because I think this is another plot point that's going to have more screen time. A character like Filavandrel. We're going to see all of these other factions be introduced in season 2, and I think Filavandrel is going to have a big impact. We have it in our notes here. Nightmare of the Wolf. Filavandrel, his character actually voiced Filavandrel in Nightmare of the Wolf, so that was cool, making that connection, giving him a little bit more kind of story to chomp on to get to know Filavandrel a little bit more. But this, I think you're right, the xenophobia was definitely more prominent in the show, and focusing on that, I think will create a bigger conflict going forward because we are going to see more of that.
Yeah, and they used a little of it in Yennefer's story because they made her a quarter elf, and that became a political issue when they're deciding where to send the different wizards. They used that as a reason to not send her because they're like, well, you don't want to send the elf girl down there. They're like, she's only a quarter elf, and they're like, let's see them do that math, to Cintra, like so. Something
with elf blood being dangerous as well. We know that royal elf blood is magical in some sort of way, and that can also be judged. You know what I mean? Oh, those people are dangerous. We can't have any elf blood. That's another thing too, I think.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if they start leaning into that also with the dwarves, because the episode with the dwarves, I don't remember. I don't think they particularly I don't know if anyone's like a huge fan of them, but I don't know that they leaned quite as much into like the dwarven persecution that they do in the books.
Because they were also pushed back. They were some of the first inhabitants on the continent, right? Like it was elves, dwarves, and then they were all pushed back by humans who gained a knowledge of magic.
Well, the dwarves are more of an example of what Geralt was trying to tell to Filavandrel to do. He's like, look, you need to like assimilate, you know, like it sucks, but you got to do it. And that's what they could have done. They could have said, yeah, like the dwarves did. The dwarves are a part of society because they have skills that the humans don't have, right? They have this incredible ability to forge things. Like they're great at mining and forging and better than the humans. So that's their sort of place in society, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's ethical, but it is an example of a different scenario that worked out with a lot less animosity. But still, there's animosity. It's still there, yeah. You know, a little funny note, Tisea calling Yennefer Piglet and all these little insults. It's totally, I realized that it's totally the way Yen insults Ciri, the same way calling her ugly one and all that. It's the same thing. It's just like, you're not actually ugly. I'm just saying that to you to like toughen you up. Yeah, same thing.
Of course, we have the Geralt and Jaskier adventure as well.
Yeah.
The Edge of the World stuff and Toss a Coin, which ended up becoming an absolutely massive hit. Apparently, there's another Toss a Coin type of song for season 2, and they plan to make that kind of a per season type deal. They're going to have all sorts of great songs that are going to be coming our way. But this was one that, you know, I think that we talked about a little bit, that we were a little bit disappointed about. Obviously, we know that there can only take a certain amount of time each episode to devote to these short stories. And I felt like this one was one of the weaker adaptations out of the season. I didn't particularly like the CGI for Torque either, because he's, I guess I kind of have my own image of him from the books too. Was him being a Sylvan and, you know, just him being a lovable character. So I kind of felt like that fell flat. He didn't have as much of an impact, I thought, personally. But I mean, like I said, I'm not as upset because I don't think that in the grand scheme of things, this is a story that has as much impact as like a Last Witch or something like that, you know?
Yeah, that's fair.
I know what your guys' thoughts on that, but that's kind of, I don't think I need to add too much more to that other than that.
It's a weird story to start off with, so, you know, and they didn't really lean into like the jovel on the people who talk super weirdly. And
I wish they had. It's so funny.
Right, so but that's a big part of the story, and it kind of leads into things. So I think if you're, and I get why they cut it, because it doesn't have like that much plot relevance, but yeah, I mean, I love this episode for Jaskier and just meeting him and getting the beginning of the like puppy angry old man dynamic.
Yeah, and it does fit. Like, I agree that some of the adaptation is a little wonky, and I know that this is the episode that when people were first watching the show, they were like, boy, this show has a real Xena feel to it, you know. And this is like, that's what it was. You got like a bard following around a warrior who's kind of not super happy about the bard being there, but grows to like them.
It's
that's
usually
like
the case, right?
Yeah, that's like what Joxer the Mighty, wasn't that his name in Xena? I didn't actually watch that show very much, but I remember that character. And it seems like, and I remember people comparing it to that. And I think this is the episode people were thinking of when they said that. The funny thing I noticed was the music. The Toss a Coin music starts before he plays the song. It's actually part of the early part of the episode, and I only noticed that this last time. I was like, hey, that's Toss a Coin before he's actually written it. I love Toss a Coin so much, not because of the song. Like, it's a good song. Like, don't get me wrong. I find it very catchy, but I just love that it worked out. It's so meta, right? The whole point of him writing that song was to repair Geralt's reputation. And it doesn't work if the song isn't popular. And then they wrote into the show that the song is popular. They like write in that the song spreads. It's catchy. People are singing it 2 episodes later in the bar, right? And which of course is many years later, but still they're singing it in the bar. And it's like, that would come off as a little contrived, maybe like, oh, this song got popular, but it got popular in the real world. So it's incredibly believable. Like, it was a huge hit on Earth. So like, yeah, well, I can believe it got popular on the continent if it got popular on Earth. So I just love that so much. It worked out so well.
I think that's one thing that caught through the whole season. We have in other episodes, you know, Jaskier's up to no good, and he's kind of gallivanting around and making jokes and trying to make light of situations and doing his Barty type things. And that was always something that I was like, oh, I was always looking forward to that whenever it happened. It was like the highlight of the episode or one of the highlights of the episode. I think going forward too, obviously things get more serious, but having Jaskier as kind of that comedic element, he reminds, I don't want to use a Game of Thrones comparison, but he's a lot like Tyrion. You know what I mean? He's got this cleverness and this humor to him, and he brings that bright sunshine sometimes when you have this darkness within an episode. So I just love Jaskier, and this episode definitely highlighted him for sure, I think. Yeah, I think he was the star of the episode for episode 2.
Yeah, like basically Ciri and Geralt are introduced episode 1, Yennefer and Jaskier episode 2. So yeah, kind of.
Well, I said Jaskier, but Yennefer is also very good in episode 2.
Yeah, she is. It's stuff that we kind of knew, but was off page. But the new stuff with her, like the Istrid stuff and the stuff below the school, and that Aretuza was built by elves, we knew that, but it's cool to see it, and and all those skulls is really creepy and cool. It's like skulls of elves instead of blood of elves. Yeah. And we see the Tower of the Gull, which is cool. That's not, the significance of it isn't known at that point, but obviously having read the books, you know that that's more important later. And Teruvial is in the main books too. So it's a lot of good setup. Yeah. I thought it was pretty solid.
Aretuza is a beautiful place.
Yeah. Oh, we also see some of the other I like that there's some of the other sorceresses are there with Yennefer, like Sabrina and Fringilla and some of the others. But those are the main two that I remember. That's nice.
And we kind of get to see a little bit of their past and how they were before they were very. I wouldn't say they weren't strong then, but they become a lot stronger and more confident in themselves. That's for sure.
I love the reasons, like they're there, like, you know why you're here. You did something with magic, and she says, Sabrina, you made your mother fat. She just kind of looks down like, yeah, I did, not do it again. She doesn't look sorry at all. She's like, she had it coming. Sabrina, that actress playing Sabrina, has that face of the I do what I want. Like, I'm better than you.
So this
is well cast.
So this next episode, Aziz, Betrayer Moon, is one of the fan favorites of season 1.
And
it has some great cinematography, and I think that I think that this is probably my favorite episode of the season, just with the mix of kind of like what happens to the Witcher and the Striga story and all of that. And I just thought it was brilliantly shot. Cinematically, I think it was the most beautiful episode, personally. But yeah, there's kind of a debate going on. I put up the poll and everybody kind of picked their own favorite episodes, but this happens to be my personal favorite. I don't know about you guys, but there's something about this episode that is kind of the darkness of it that kind of grasped me.
I saw some people classify it as a horror episode, the most of any of them, and I agree with that. I mean, the Striga stuff is very horror element. It's got that tragic romance horror thing going. It's got like, it feels like a lot of vampire stories where you've got, because you even right down Dracula. To the incest, and yeah, I agree with you. It's got a great feel to it. Yeah, it's even, which is interesting because it's perhaps less important overall to the plot, but it was just really well done. I like even the stuff that I don't normally care about that much, like action. I'm like, I like action. I like good action, but I don't. It's not at the top of the list for me, but just the way they had him like blow the floor open with the sign, with the Ard sign, that was cool. Like that's a smart, like clever way to him to use his powers. It isn't just like straight up action, like back and forth, and it looked awesome. Yeah. Like
he uses multiple signs in this episode. He uses Irden as well, which is like a magical ward. And he's yeah. So a lot of cool stuff happens this episode for sure, as far as like witchering goes. He gets the obviously what's it called, the hourglass, and he's like, he has to survive the night, and that's he's like becoming a vampire himself. That's so freaking cool.
Yeah, so they definitely kept a lot of the homages present, which I like. I one of the things I really liked about the season overall is they did a good job. I mean, I mentioned that in the first one here, but Lauren Hisrich seems to really care about keeping a lot of those nods and that heart of The Witcher, which is the fairy tale stuff, some of the humor, the Destiny stuff, but also this sense of the fairy tale elements, like the homages that were present in the short stories are still present here. Like we talked about how this was very much like Dracula. I mean, he's a white-haired dude, breaking the curse instead of creating one. He sleeps in a coffin just for this one night. It's like, yeah, I see. Silver, horror elements. Like, it starts with the kid with his chest cut open, just like, at the curse of midnight, when it crosses over a grave, when a pregnant woman has died. He's like telling the story as he's dying. It's like, ooh, yeah, this is intense, man.
What were your thoughts on the episode, Michal?
It was gross. I don't need to see a monster trailing a desiccated umbilical cord ever again. I'm good. I think, I liked it. This is also the introduction of Triss, right? In this episode. So that was cool. It was also, a nice adjustment to see like female sorceresses being advisors in out in the world. Yeah, I mean, I found the Yennefer story like partly very moving. I do think they probably should have had some kind of like suicide attempt warning at the beginning of the episode. Because I've had this discussion with people, and obviously like it's weird to say that there's a mass suicide in the first episode, and I don't necessarily think that needs a warning because it's so situational.
People drinking poison, like that doesn't reflect reality nearly as much.
And
like,
they wouldn't be doing that if Nilfgaard wasn't about to come kill them. Like, they don't want to die.
It's not
whereas
depression.
I feel like right, Yennefer is in a much more kind of, I guess, typical depression situation.
More realistic.
Yeah. But it's really cool to see her relationship with Tissaia start like really growing, and that kind of adversarial, way in which she kind of refuses to understand her and kind of deliberately almost refuses to be successful at magic. I found that really interesting. And yeah, I do wonder if they were considering where to put the Witcher storyline, just because incest has become so incest is like practically like TM Game of Thrones at this point,
Yeah.
So, like, I wonder if they wanted to be like, okay, we want to put it in so that people know it's there, but we also don't want it to be like, we're just doing this because of Game of Thrones.
Totally agree.
And, but yeah, I mean, it's a good episode. It's not my favorite. The next one is my favorite, but I find that it definitely, I don't know, it gives you, it's a chilling adventure,
Like the way they interspersed the Striga's pain and rage, which was set up by the very moving scene between Foltest and Geralt, where he describes like what she's going through and like how he just went through something similar with Renfrey, and he gives him the brooch and all that. It isn't my first time trying to save a princess from a curse. What happened to that one? I killed her, and he's like, oh,
Yeah.
And it's very sad, but it's also good setup because, he loves his daughter, even though she's not exactly. I mean, saying she's not normal is way underselling it. But he still like clearly has. He's not sharing this moment with anyone else, so it's real. He's not putting on airs for Geralt. He's not pretending to be emotional for Geralt. Like, first of all, kings would rarely pretend to be emotional about anything except angry, but he's legitimately moved and sad, and
he's
genuinely empathic about it.
Yeah, and Geralt says, he's like, is she going to be normal? And he says all she's ever known, she's basically an animal. She's been raised, she knows rage and hunger. And when she's screaming and fighting Geralt and trying to get away, it's interspersed with Yennefer's transformation, which she decides to go in without drugs, because Yennefer, if there's anything about her, is she goes farther than anyone else. She's like, oh, you do that? I'm going to go farther. This is like, oh, that's this? I'll go a step farther. That's one of Yennefer's personality traits.
That shows her strength. That's her personal strength. She can push farther than anyone.
Yeah. And when she breaks up with Istrid because he was trying to like put her in a box, like trying to make her into like a wife, she's like, hell no. That stuff is similar to Shard of Ice, except it's got this whole like school versus school politics stuff where Istrid is setting her up because Stragobor wants him to, and it's the Stragobor versus Tissaia stuff that's hardly touched on, but I guess that's going to be a bigger thing going forward, which I guess makes sense given other events in the books. But anyway, we'll come back to that later. So yeah, I just thought it was, I thought it was pretty moving. It was gross, but it was pretty moving. A lot of the like love across borders and
the mirroring was really good in this episode, like you're talking about, Aziz, like the scene to scene stuff. That's why, because like I loved Yennefer's transformation, showing that she had to go through pain to get to this new process, and then you see her walk in the room and she commands everyone. It's like commands everyone with her beauty, but she already had a beautiful personality. So like we know that she had a beautiful personality. So when she walks in the room and she does that, I think she does.
I love Yennefer. I'm not sure she has a beautiful personality. She has a very strong personality.
Maybe I like them spicy. I don't know.
Maybe let's remember what the expression in my head. Remember what Yennefer says to Ciri what I was talking about before. And she says, "Why do you keep calling me ugly one?" She's like, "Because I'm malicious." She just flat out says it. Hey, I'm malicious.
Maybe I like honesty. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, I mean, it's all interesting because, like, first of all, I just want to, it's not the most brilliant thing, but like the birth imagery and the rebirth imagery when Geralt's fighting the Striga and Yennefer is being like both having her uterus torn out and her physical form is reborn. Like it looks like she's being born in a way and / giving birth. But like the other thing I was going to say has completely flown out of my head. So sorry. It was really smart.
Yeah, it is really good. Yeah, I think we all agree that the interposing of those scenes was really well, not just because they look similar, but because like the themes and the emotions are similar. So it's like parallels in a lot of ways, and that's great. It's powerful.
Yeah. No, I remember it was that Yennefer it's ironic because in this scene she's going through all this to physically conform to kind of society's expectations, whereas nothing inside her is capable of conforming. Like she is completely anti-conformist, which is why I say that she doesn't have like a great personality, just because she's like, and that's part of what gets between her and Geralt. Like she does not want to conform in any way to anyone else's expectations, even if it's going to make her happy. So like that's part of her psychology and struggle going forward.
It's like her anti-conformity is strong, but sometimes too strong. Like you said, I think really well. It keeps her from being happy.
Yeah, her rebelliousness sometimes keeps her from growing, but also makes her grow. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And she thinks she needs to have a child to have that. That's the thing that becomes more of an ongoing plot. That she's also mad that was taken from her. But we find out also way later in the books that Tissaia. Well, maybe not way later, but later in the books, Tissaia says, all sorceresses should be made infertile as a matter of course. Just it should be part of the transformation. It's like because they're, you realize it's not just the magic doesn't just make that. It's a policy, which is part of why she's angry about it later, because it doesn't have to be the case. And we learn Geralt's mother is one of the exceptions, maybe, and all that. So, yeah. Couple of quick points, just random trivia about this episode, more like connections to the books or Easter eggs or dot connection. That dead Witcher we mentioned in the Nightmare on the Wolf episode is Remus, who was one of the 4 kids that escapes at the end. So, and there's a kind of an in-joke there. He's feeling like for his missing parts. And Triss says, you two clearly aren't acquainted with each other. It's like, well, actually, they went through the Trial of Grasses together. They say a Witcher runs off with the money, but it's not. That's not what happened. They think the Witcher ran off with the money. In the book, a Witcher does run off with the money and a Witcher gets killed. Like 2 things happen. Wait, actually, does a Witcher get killed? No, actually, I can't remember. I don't think a Witcher gets killed in the book. I think that they just one runs off. He's like, nah, I'm not doing that. I'm running away. So they sort of intersperse these plots with a Witcher ran off with the money. Oh, no. In this version, they made them think a Witcher ran off with the money. And Geralt's pissed about that because he's like, you made them think he ran off with their money rather than letting them know a Witcher was killed by this thing. And that just adds to the whole Witchers are hated thing. He's like, you just threw Witchers under the bus again. Like this guy he died for you and you made everyone think he ran away. So yeah, that was kind of sad. We didn't really talk about Ciri that much in this one. It's pretty straightforward. She's not actually in it very much. She's lost with Dara, rat boy, and she feels a call towards Broccolon. And then Dara gets shot with an arrow, which is very similar to the beginning of Sword of Destiny when Geralt is thinking about like random boys just being shot because they happen to get too close to Broccolon and not knowing why and all that. So, yeah, more on that later because it continues. So I guess, one other thing. Fringilla's uncle, Artorius Vigo, is in a couple episodes this season. He's in the books, but he isn't actually seen. He's just off to page. He gets talked about, but he's never actually seen. So we actually see him this time. So kind of another example of like Stragobor, where they're just keeping it simple by not trying to give you a bunch of names that don't come back. They're like, well, we're using this character, so we're going to keep using this character rather than...
Better to create that connection and keep that thread going anyways. It's like to keep it at least going for one season because we know that other characters are going to flourish and become bigger factors later on. But I think for the sake of continuity for the first season, I think that was a good decision.
Yeah.
I guess we can call it the law of conservation of wizards.
Not that we want it to happen.
One last line. Foltest had a line that I really liked, even though the context is gross, because he's talking about his sister, but he's talking about love. And he's like, for all it brightens, love casts dark shadows. It's like, that's a pretty good line, except the context is really gross. But
except you're banging your sister, bro.
Yeah, right. But I also wonder, is that like a nod to the show Dark Shadows, which also has some of those themes and is also horror and vampire-y stuff, which would really fit with a lot of the stuff going on.
I doubt it, but it's probably because you have a brilliant mind that you can make that connection.
Well, we'll just leave that hanging. Maybe we'll find out one day. So let's go on to the next one. McCall's favorite. Yay. So McCall, what's of Banquets, Bastards, and Betrayals, which very much corresponds to A Question of Price. What made this one your favorite, McCall?
Well, I think I had a similar reaction to it when I read the short story, which is that, like, we're kind of in this world. We're getting ourselves oriented. We're meeting people. Like, we start to understand where things are going. And this kind of starts to show us why we're here. And it starts to, for one thing, like, I love anytime characters collide. So, like, when you have Calanthe and Aist and Geralt and Jaskier, and Mousak all, coming together and having a chance to actually talk, it's really exciting. And also just Jaskier is like hilarious in this episode. I love him so much. It's just like a very, it's a very fantasy fairy tale kind of story. I think it's interesting that they contrast it with maybe the darkest storyline in the show so far, which is the Ballad of the Dead Baby. But yeah, that's really intense. And I can even honestly, I have a lot of sympathy even for the mom, in that case, because, like, obviously, it's a shitty thing to want to, sacrifice your daughter so you can survive. But at the same time, you can imagine, like, what she's been through, like giving birth time after time after time and having it come to literally nothing, and like being so undervalued that her husband is just going to have her murdered in the middle of nowhere. So I have a lot of sympathy for that character, even though she's probably not like a great person.
I agree. Yeah. Like, she's like that one of those people that's like, you're in a gilded cage. Everyone looks at her and thinks she has a great life, but she's basically a prisoner. She's just dressed nicely and gets to eat good food, and all that. But, like, you can tell she looks at Yennefer, goes, I envy you so much. And Yennefer's like, what now? So they both aren't seeing, they're both looking at the grass is greener type. Like, they both don't see the downside of the other,
And you can see the discomfort also with Ciri's mom. Right, like they kind of in a similar situation, right? Like, they're royalty, but royalty isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, and I love how Calanthe's like slowly losing the argument, even as she's lording it over. Pavetta's like, "You're going to get married because blah blah blah." And Pavetta's like, yeah, but like this and that, and Calanthe's like, "Okay, well, he's not so bad. Okay, well, it's not that. Okay, well," it's like, okay, he won't smell that bad. Okay, he won't, like, it's like what Ciri says in the book. Ciri says it's like when Ciri is trying to, in the book, she's trying to reconcile what she's been told is attractive in a man with what she actually feels. And she's like, well, what I've been taught is that if attractive man is huge, hairy, always smells like horses, dogs, and beer, and he's loud, it's like, that's considered attractive in Cintra. But she's like, I never really got that, because she's looking at, she makes this comparison when looking at Yara, right? And she's like kind of into him, but he's so not like that. She's confused. So it's just really touching. Like, it made me think of that with Pavetta, because Pavetta's like, I don't want to marry any of these losers. Like, they all suck. Are you kidding me?
What's so great about this episode too is that Michal, you can bounce off this too, is that we get to see characters like Ike and Kalantha and Pavetta take center stage, right? We see them die. We see Kalantha and Ike die, right? Like that's a big thing. So getting to see kind of some of the wheels turning for why these characters make the decisions that they make is really interesting, right? It gives us insight and perspective onto why these characters are the way they are. And I think that that's a really interesting thing to have in an episode for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, even practically, this just confirms the time jumping and kind of gives us a solid point to kind of, okay, so we know that when Ciri is conceived, so like we have, it makes things a little bit more compact and less complicated, which I appreciate.
I think that's the consensus too. Like my cousin was watching the show, for example, and he's like, oh, I finally got it around this episode. I kind of started to make sense of things. It's like, okay, there's the multiple timelines, and this is kind of when things are converging, and this is why they're telling this story now. And then going forward, you can kind of see how things progress. And I think I can see why it's your favorite episode. It's definitely one of the best episodes of the season. It's got a mix of everything that you want. It's got the fairy tale elements of it. It's got the great storytelling. It's got the backstory. It's got the kind of the predictive nature of like the law of surprise, things that we're going to learn about in the future. It's got all the great elements of the Witcher story in this particular episode and story.
Yeah. And also just Calanthe being like so shitty to the Nilfgaardian ambassador, like just casts a whole different light on that whole thing. Like not that behavior would justify a horrific genocide of Cintra, but like you do get that, like, oh, maybe this isn't just like a they hate us so they're attacking us type of thing. Like there's doing a couple more things going on here.
Yeah, and while that's happening, right, you have Ciri running away from the sack of Cintra by Nilfgaard. So that you get to see like they're laughing at Nilfgaard, but now Nilfgaard has come back big time, strong and powerful.
It's like, hey, bitch, I'm back.
Yeah, like, oops, like I guess maybe we shouldn't have mocked you quite so much. But yeah, there's it talks about how the usurper is still in power. Like that's mentioned. The usurper is in power during that scene where they're mocking the suitor. And that's part of why they're mocking him. They're like, kings just fall like rain down there. Y'all can't keep any sort of consistency down there, which having read the books, she's probably exaggerating because it's not like it went from Emhyr's father to the usurper to Emhyr. Like that there wasn't this, turnstile at the throne. Maybe the show canon does have that, but I think maybe they're just saying that to mock them. Which is ironic given that she gets ejected and her line is deposed from Cintra as well. And there's this really good scene where they cut back from the party when it's kind of ending, and they show the flag of Nilfgaard from a distance, and Cintra is all whole, and it falls farther back, and then the flag blocks the screen, and it's the Nilfgaard flag blocking the whole screen, and then it moves forward again, and Cintra's on fire, and you're right there, and Ciri's having her nightmare. So it's really, I thought that was really well done, just showing like kind of framing it all, like this is that time passing. And
I also think this kind of relates to what we were talking about earlier too, the fanaticism. We talked about how that's going to be more prevalent. Like, look at how much power they gain in such a short time. Like the idea of incepting something into someone's mind, like a religious idea. Look at what happened. Nilfgaard completely is cleaning the continent. Like they are the ultimate power. No one can stop them, essentially.
Yeah, like one of the big, what's really interesting is that I hadn't noticed this before is using Fringilla as an example, because Fringilla is like this friendly, nice, like she's the one that when Tissaia is going around the room saying what they did to get noticed magically, she's like, you froze a cat, and Fringilla's like, by accident. It was by accident. She didn't want people to think she was a cat freezer or whatever. Like she's sensitive about it. But here, like fast forward later, she's like, Nilfgaard has given me a purpose, and she's stabbing a dude just to read his entrails after he eats Calanthe's skin. It's like, whoa, this is not the girl that was sorry about freezing a cat anymore, is it? Wow. So I think that's kind of an under the radar thing, and especially because her uncle didn't want her to go there. He's like, Artorias is like, I don't want her to go down there, but he didn't want her to go down there for a completely different reason. He's like, no one with ambition wants to go to Nilfgaard. Whoops.
We see how trauma shapes people differently, right? Like Fringilla changed into becoming a commander of the White Flame. Like she was this nice, empathetic, compassionate person, and now she's basically an attack dog for an emperor who's basically claiming power over the whole continent. Like that's a pretty big change, I would think, in philosophy. But anger can do a lot of things to people.
Yep. So a couple other odds and ends here. We got Covered in Filth at the beginning, which again is just showing us how you get the little bits of Shard of Ice scattered throughout different episodes. Prior episode had Naked Yennefer. This one has Naked Geralt, the famous bath scene that he apparently like didn't eat for a week before doing that scene.
And they like have to hydrate. I mean, like it's honestly never be an actor.
He didn't hydrate for a week, or he hydrated like as little as possible, I believe, so his pores would be open or something.
Yeah, you're right. Like the things actors and actresses do to like look.
His veins were like popping out. He's already jacked enough.
He's like, yeah, I'm good looking, but I'm not that good looking all the time. Like, no, this is a human. Yeah, it's like, come on, man, I'm a human being.
God, that would give you such a headache. Also, sorry.
Yeah, for real. Like, seriously.
I'm just waiting for Kate Bertinsky to jump up and chat because she loves Henry Cable.
By the way, it was last episode, and I know we said. You said you weren't going to talk about Game of Thrones again, but I'm going to throw in a Game of Thrones.
Oh, shit.
When you last episode, no, it is this episode. It's this episode when she's sitting there on the beach lamenting the dead baby. Her eyes look so beautifully purple, just like so perfectly purple. Like those are good. Like there's nothing wrong with those. Those eyes look great. Like why not purple eyes, man? Anyway, I'm done complaining.
No, I think that's actually one of the things that, you know, Game of Thrones from the beginning was semi-apologizing for being fantasy. And like, right. You know, and I get it. They were a new entity in that sort of, you know, like we'd had Xena, like fantasy wasn't high drama at that point. So
there wasn't even that much magic in Xena. It was mostly just like fighting, right? It was mostly just like swords and I mean, there was some, but it wasn't like, yeah. I don't know. Maybe I just don't remember it that well. But either way, I agree with you.
No, but I mean, like you know, we'd had Harry Potter and like we'd had Lord of the Rings.
That's
and
true, yeah.
Lord of the Rings, I guess, was prestige, but also like on the slightly schlocky side. And they were trying to kind of, you know, establish their like grown-up drama bona fides. And yeah.
I agree with you bringing up Wheel of Time as an example before of something that's testing the waters of really going with high magic and seeing how far audiences will go with that. Because obviously, if you've read the Wheel of Time books, there is a ton of high magic, high fantasy in it. And that's not a complaint. It's just a detail. It's you know, a categorization. I like Wheel of Time. So we'll see what they do with it.
Actually, I'll just shout out to people in the chat who were saying that episode 4 was really good. And I agree. It was. I was like not impressed with the show. And like, I was like, I know they might be losing me. And then episode 4, I was like, oh my God, I actually want to watch this. This is cool.
Are you talking about Witcher or Wheel of Time?
Sorry, Wheel of Time.
Oh, yeah. I agree with you, I haven't watched episode 5 yet, but episode 4 was really strong. The first 3 were just pretty good.
Aziz messaged me on my drive to Ottawa, and I had my I was trying not to talk too much because I was driving my 10-hour drive, but I had put cruise control on to say, Aziz, I'm going to watch it at some point. It's good.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. But if there's so much more to go. But anyway, speaking of much more to go, we still have more episodes here. One other thing about this one, I had this thought like right before the episode. Okay, so that was Queen Callis who gets killed, right? Of Lyria, Queen Callis of Lyria, and her child is killed, right? We know there's a king of Lyria in that moment because he's the one apparently who arranges the assassination. And by the way, I think that's an Idir, the creature, which we see in A Season of Storms. So their Season of Storms is a midquel. So they jumped ahead to use that, but it actually timeline-wise, this is about right. So fast forward to the main novels. Who is Queen of Lyria? It's Meve. So what exactly happened there? I think what happened is Meve is the one that marries this king after Callus is killed by this assassin, and then he dies later, and so she becomes queen in her own right. Either that or they're making a little bit of a joke about how she keeps having girls, and Laria ends up with a queen. So
I'm gonna
She's
go
a
with
great
that.
character.
I would love it if it was one of her daughters. I feel like it's long enough in the past. It's maybe. Oh no, it's only 15 years. Maybe not. But
they
whatever.
could be
Is an
playing with
awesome
the timeline a
character.
little bit, but she's
Awesome.
cast. Wasn't she cast for season 2? I think she was, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Oh,
She's going to be in season 2.
So that's
Awesome.
I'm excited about that. So they might.
Yeah,
tie
she's a
that all
great
together.
character, and her and Geralt have an awesome relationship. So I'm really excited to see what happens with that. Just quickly before we move on, Dragonheart has says, what I hate about Yen is she agrees to give up her ability to give birth. Yes, she whines about having her choice stolen when she uses to learn a sword. Good
Fair
point,
point.
Dragonheart. And thank you very much for the donation. We really appreciate you. And everybody in the chat, just a quick shout out. Thanks for joining and keeping the conversation going. There's an awesome conversation going about Wheel of Time and all sorts of awesome.
We sent everybody off in the wrong direction. Hey,
Yeah.
Kyle, you mentioned this before when we one thing you noticed that I didn't catch, but I was looking for it the last time I watched was you noticed the mosaic on the floor in this episode is very
Conjunction
like
spheres.
yeah, that's a really great detail. That's really cool. Good job, show.
Because one thing that we don't want to spoil too much is that the conjunction of spheres is very much something like we see with if you guys have ever watched Thor: Dark World, where the different worlds are open up, the Aesir is opening up, and there's kind of these monsters or other beings that can enter through different portals, and basically the conjunction of spheres is a big thing. I think we're actually going to see it in the Blood Origin prequel, I believe. So that's going to be really interesting, or at least the remnants of it. But this is important because we know that this character in Pavetta end up having Ciri, and that's where she pukes on the floor and she's like, I'm pregnant, and Geralt has the law of surprise. So the conjunction of spheres and the prophecy and all of that relates to Ciri's storyline and big magic thing. So I thought that was a really cool detail for them to have there, being like, this is pretty important, I think.
There was one other little detail that I appreciated. In the books, Adalia and then Calanthe and then Pavetta and Ciri all have green eyes and ash blonde hair. Now in the show, they went with Calanthe just having her, that's the actress's natural hair color. And they didn't bother to change it, which is fine. I like that change because she's the only one that doesn't have magic of the ones. So it's just like the ones who had ash blonde hair are the ones who have the like elven magic in them, whereas that Calanthe had the activator gene, but not the actual ability to do magic. So that was kind of cool, which also fits thematically with what Tessera was explaining to Yennefer with the eel stuff. Like just because you have magic in you doesn't mean you can perform magic. But now Pavetta can, but still.
I think it makes it interesting because Calanthe does talk about it, and we see Renfrey's hair isn't blonde either, and Ciri's hair really sticks out. So they're really trying to point out to us, okay, Ciri's blonde of hair, okay, guys, pay attention, But really, right. I think Michal's right with not saying the show watchers are stupid or anything, but it's easier to kind of just make that, okay, this character has really, really light blonde platinum hair. Like, this is the character that's special,
Well, it's a visual marker in a TV show. When it's just a description in a book, you're not constantly reminded of it. So it's not like there all the time. So like, visual markers just mean a lot more when it's a show. So I think you're totally right about that.
Bottled appetites.
Yeah, let's do that one. Bottled appetites.
So I saw someone mention in the chat they stopped because of the sex orgy.
I was like,
I don't blame you. It's a strong taste.
I think it was Real YT that said that.
Let's start with Ciri here because we didn't really talk about Ciri last time. She's having nightmares. Dara drinks the water, and you can totally get why he drinks the water. He wants to forget. He tells Ciri, he's like, look, Princess Ciri, because he finds out she's princess right then. He didn't know that before. He's like, look, your grandmother slaughtered my family. I'm the only one who survived. And she's struggling to accept that it's true. At first, she's like, that can't be true. He's like, I was there. It happened to me. And she just becomes kind of speechless because she's like, wow, my grandmother did what now? Like oh my God, she can't process it. But then Dara drinks the water and he forgets. And he's like, yep, I get rid of all those bad memories. You should do that too. And then just like Sword of Destiny, the water doesn't work on her. So there you go. I'm a little sad that we didn't get Geralt's awesome conversation with Eithne, because it's really, really strong. It's a really good part of that short story. But hey, they couldn't do Geralt and Broccolon without moving a whole lot of other things around. I kind of understand from an adaptation point why he didn't go there, but I still lament the loss of that great scene from the books.
I believe we are getting some Geralt and Neneke stuff though in season 2, apparently. So some stuff that people were missing from that kind of plot line doesn't relate to this, but throwing that in there, I think that we are getting some of that in season 2. So
yeah,
fingers crossed. We want as much as we can.
So the Doppler, that was an interesting way to solve this plot issue. Kovir says you can't send an army into Broccolon. Like one of his subcommanders, like, we can send 10 or 12,000 men into Broccolon, and he's like, shut up. He literally says, shut up. He's like, that's not the way to go into Broccolon. Damn it. He's like mad because he's like, yeah, we got to do something weird to do it. And so a couple of homages in the scene. I know a lot of, if you're like me, you were a little disappointed that they made this psycho Doppler instead of the cool, clever, happy, dainty Bibervelt. But at least Kovir says, you're not like other Dopplers, are you? Not helpful or good, and he's like, what can I do for you? I like the touch of him calling himself we, because he takes multiple forms and it makes him creepier.
Yeah.
And he was dressed in red, which I thought was a nice touch, because remember, that's the thing. He makes bank in the short story off of red dye. So I thought that was kind of a neat little touch to make him be dressed in bright red when the scene starts. And then he quickly just gets naked and his clothes are forgotten about. But,
you can see all his jars of ears and other human parts. It's like, oh man, this guy's a collector. It's weird.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense that a species pushed to the brink by humans would hate humans. So, like, I kind of get that much, but it doesn't mean he has to be a total psycho. But anyway.
Speaking of total psychos, is this the first episode where we really get, like, Kovir is different than in the books?
Pretty much, because, like, the only change before this is that he's clearly higher rank, because he was leading the army at the Battle of Marnadal Stairs and Amel Pass. And he's the one who kills Iced with the arrow to the eye. So, those are smallish changes to the overall plot. But this is, it starts to become a bigger change. Like, he's definitely higher ranked. He's definitely a factor of the law of conservation of Nilfgaardian officers.
I will point out this because someone is pointing it out in chat. Macro, one of our friends over in Europe, says, I want Bouquet here. The show one is just blah. I do agree with you. I think Bouquet here, there's just a great amount of layers to this character. I do think we're going to get some of that in season 2. I keep on harping on that. And I think he's going to be one of those characters that he's going to get more screen time. That he's going to have a bigger POV. I think he will have a pretty big impact in season 2. That's just my kind of guess.
Yeah, I'm real curious. I'm curious, but I have no idea. I hope you're right. What do you think, Michal?
I mean, I've said this before, but I really think that they're going the Jaime Lannister route with him, and they are doing the whole starting him here so that we can get him here. Because the character does go through a lot of shit in the books, and once you realize who he really is in the books, you're not happy about that, as opposed to it being kind of like a character growth thing, which is fine. I think that's totally valid. I love Kate in the books. But that's the only explanation I can think of for having him literally slaughter innocent people for no reason.
I think it's kind of like Fringilla. I think he's bought into this White Flame prophecy. I think maybe that's the thing that he'll realize is not as true as he's been told. Maybe he'll get a little Geralt in him, where Geralt's a little too far. Geralt goes too far with it's all bull. None of these prophecies have any merit whatsoever. Where it's don't go that far, Geralt. Man, there's a little something to these things, but they're just open. They are open to interpretation, and you definitely shouldn't listen to the Emperor of Nilfgaard's interpretation of it. But other people's interpretations, and not Stragobor's either, but other people's, maybe the other interpretations might be a little something in there. But anyway, I think that's the thing. I think he's caught up in this whole White Flame business, and if he breaks free of that, well, who knows?
Michal makes a really great point, and I think it relates to what we talked about for fanaticism. I'm going to bring it up again. I think they're making it more extreme so we can have more redemptive elements and characters like Fringilla and Kovir, because once we see that what they're going through behind the scenes and what they have to deal with and how powerful a certain person is, I think that will change our perception on, oh, this person is just doing this because they're this rank or whatever. Then we're going to come to understand, hey, we don't necessarily agree with their decisions, but we may understand why they had to make them.
I do think that there's potential for making the, like, when Kovir and Geralt finally meet, like having that meeting with maybe Kovir having gone through a lot more, that could be really juicy and interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very curious. I think you guys have some really good ideas on what she might be thinking, she meaning Lauren Hisrich, with her plans for this. But I also, the thing I agree with the strongest is that it'll probably end up where the books end up, in a little, not 1-to-1, but even though we're getting there in a different way, I think we'll probably still end up with a lot of that same stuff. So it seems awfully different now, but it may not seem that way later.
Mm-hmm. There's some spoilery stuff going on in chat. I want to say something about it so bad because it's like one of my favorite things ever. But yeah, I'll just say yes. Yes.
As far as the actual like Jen and Last Wish stuff, it seems pretty tightly hewn to the books. The book, the short story, like just the core elements of that. Their meeting, it's pretty well captured. I thought. Do you guys agree? Or
yeah, I think it was really good.
Yeah, no, I do. Also, people were talking about like not liking the Geralt can't sleep thing. I agree it's a little random, but I did watch in preparation for this like a couple of season recaps, and I think it was maybe New Rockstars or something like that. Their take was that this is the first time Geralt is actively running away from Ciri, so he's running against Destiny for the first time. And so that is kind of like, and obviously part of his thing with Yennefer is Destiny. So like that might be like a, kind of a cosmic sort of punishment that he can't sleep because he should be in Cintra and he is not.
And then he meets the love of his life and he's knocked out. She's like, he passed out already, man.
Yeah, because when he leaves Cintra, Mousesack is like, dude, you're leaving? You can't mess with Destiny like this. Like, if you don't come back or if you don't take care of your business, we're all going to suffer badly. He's like, consequences. No, we won't. He's like, you fool.
Burns to the fucking ground, man.
Yeah, he's like, you foolish fool, Mousesack. Nothing's going to happen. Whoops.
It's like famous last words, right?
Also, the end of this episode is like word for word from the end of The Last Wish, and I love that so much. It's like it really is kind of a scene from the books, just right, like brought to life with them thinking that they're destroyed and then looking in the window and seeing like, oh no, okay, never mind, they're doing something else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought this was one of the episodes that was as far as adaptations go, it was pretty accurate. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I agree.
A lot of the imagery popped, and I was like, "Yes, this is so good."
Yeah, it was good. I liked it. Definitely, I definitely agree with the criticisms of the opening scene with the sleeping thing and like how does like Macrophage says, how does he know there was even a genie in that lake? Like, yeah, I'm with you there. Like that's weird. Also, I want to add something to that. Like I agree with you. Or shout out to New Rockstars or whoever it was that you got that idea from. That's a good take. But also, let's think logistics here. They couldn't do the book scene. They can't do this weird fishing like cartoon being pulled around on a boat thing. That would cost a lot of money. Not saying you have to land on there's a genie in this lake. That's not where you have to go, given that fish scene would have been really expensive to film, like filming a boat scene, but still, we could at least say that much. That
I see the convenience. I see the convenience of it being corny. I see why people. I do get why people see that though.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much all we got for this one?
I think so. Personally, yeah.
Rare Species. This was your favorite short story in the books, Aziz.
Yeah, I really like this one because it's super tight with the themes, and like every character, like main characters all have something huge in common. Yennefer, Geralt, and Villain Trettenmirth are all like on the same page what they're trying to do. It's just that Villain Trettenmirth is farther along, and he gives them purpose, and they both badly needed that. One of them, he's like, look, Yennefer hasn't gotten that far yet, but she doesn't realize that she doesn't have to have her own child to be a mother. You can be a mother or a mother figure to somebody else, and that's just as fulfilling or almost as fulfilling or in the ballpark, similar enough. It doesn't have to be a child of your body. And Geralt's like, I'm aimless. I have no purpose. And Villain Trettenmirth's like, dude, if you had a kid to take care of, let me tell you, there's a lot of purpose in that. Like, hey, like me, look at me, new dad. I've got an egg to take care of. Let me tell you from experience, this gives me purpose. This gives me a reason to live, which is a really huge central theme to the entire Witcher universe. Found family, family is a big part of so many stories that have been written ever, like all time. Family is one of the core elements. So I really love that The Witcher is about found family, about adopted family, about the people you make your family rather than your blood family, because it's similar, but it doesn't get enough ink and screen time compared to the more standard traditional family scenarios that permeate every show and book and movie, like almost exclusively. So that's part of why I'm so fond of this one, is it really dials into that and does it so well. And I do have criticisms of this episode. I thought the action was weak, but that's fine. I don't care, because season 1, they don't have much of a budget for it. I don't care that the dragon was wonky looking. That's a budget thing too. We already can tell season 2 is going to have better budget.
The action
so
will be
like, I'm
way
just
better.
not too worried about that, but yeah, definitely. I
don't think that was supposed to be the focus of season 1 anyways. It gets way
No.
better as the seasons go on, as the seasons will go on.
Yeah, like I didn't see the need to make Yennefer into a warrior also, out of all, it's like, it's not like she's taken on guys who are professional fighters. Like, it's a little wonky, she's,
I think they wanted kind of like
being a sword warrior. I think that was budget too. Like, they don't want her sitting there casting spells when it's just much easier to film her swinging a sword twice,
I think they also wanted her and Geralt as like a tandem team up before the breakup type deal, like as more of them being together, like fighting together, like side by side, more of them having more in common than not as well.
That's definitely a sad part of this episode too,
Yeah.
right? He takes out his frustrations on Jaskier, and then we don't see him again. He's not going to be
And
back.
that was my main thing when I finished episode 8. I was like, well, where's Jaskier?
Yeah, there wasn't any more of him for 2 whole episodes. So he's in 5 episodes. He's not in episode 1, 7, or 8. So hopefully I'm
gonna need him to be in all of them.
I knew you were gonna say that. That's such a Michal thing to say.
By the way, we didn't shout out that he actually learned how to play that lute. Like, he plays the lute like boss.
Yeah, well, he actually might have learned it, I think, for he was in Bring Up the Bodies, the Hilary Mantel adaptation on Broadway and the West End, and he had to play a lute for that. So that might have been where he learned to play a lute.
I bet he never realized how big that would come up in his casting.
Yeah, right.
He's like, dude, I play the lute already. They're like, you do? Oh, you're on the final group here. Like, that's nice.
Just to give a 2-second defense for Yennefer sword fighting, which I get the objection to. I too like characters to kind of stay in their skill lane. But like Anthony Shaddix has just pointed out, and I was feeling this also, that like she's been alive for a really long time. Like, it's not crazy to think she would have been bored at one point and been like, you know what? I'm gonna take up sword fighting. Like, why not?
Fair point.
Yeah.
She, in the last episode, she complains about, or the one before it, she complains about 3 decades of politics, just boring. Yeah. Why not do a little sword training during that 3 decades of boring ass politicking? So yeah. Why not? Yeah, it fits. It's definitely not I couldn't push that complaint too far, and I won't. So yeah.
Ryan Burns has the hashtag. Let's get it going right now. Hashtag Joey Beatty. Come on the pod.
Oh my god, I will lose my shit.
Guys, we're gonna have to do a lot more work to make that happen, I think. But we can.
Yeah, maybe
try.
after season 2 we could try to, or during. Yeah, maybe we could do that.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys, they'll come on shows. You never know.
And we got some special things in store. Come on to the podcast, Joey Beatty. You are a sexy man. Let's talk about The Witcher.
Play your flute for our listeners. Will fangirl.
Well, now he's never coming on.
Yeah,
these
right.
guys suck at
We
singing.
ruined
How can
it.
I come on?
We ruined it just like that.
Thanks,
one other bit of this episode. Ciri has the Doppler Mousak talks about the law of surprise, like it comes up, like she's quizzing him, like, what do you like? She's kind of suspicious, but doesn't figure it all out. The Doppler has a falling out with Kovir. And this is part of why I think Cahir's obsession with the White Flame is part of the change to his character that will probably be undone later, but maybe not. Is because even the Doppler is like, you guys with this White Flame prophecy are crazy. He's like, this stuff is nuts to me. Like, even the Doppler is like, this stuff is going too far. Like, the psycho flesh collector is like, y'all are nuts here with this White Flame stuff. So that says that's kind of telling when the psycho even thinks you're going too far. Yep.
White Flame is nutty, but excited to get to see. Do we want to say anything else about this episode? CGI. The one thing I did point out earlier, a lot of people harping on the CGI in this episode. That's going to be fixed for season 2.
Yeah. They got more money. They got that bigger bank. I wonder how much larger the budget was. I don't think we know that yet.
Netflix tossed a coin, definitely.
Yeah, they tossed some big old coins, right? Because they got some downloads. I mean, not some downloads. They got some streams. They got 100 million streams or whatever they got. I don't know how many it was, but it was a huge number.
It was over 75 million. I know that much.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say, I think I've heard that there's supposed to be less nudity in season 2, and like this episode is maybe a good example of a little too much. Yennefer is just like all out there, like for so long, and I 1,000% give Anya Charlotra, so much credit because she has to like actually act. Like it's not just like she's doing a lot of stuff and she's buck naked.
Yeah, true that.
After The Witcher came out, I think it was 3 or 4 months later, she was the #1 rated actress on IMDb. Pretty crazy.
So that seems to be like a thing, right? What you're talking about, Michal, with like a lot of times you see a show start off with nudity and then back it off. Partly because the actors, partly because they're trying to get more attention, but also I think the actors start to push back. They're like, "Look, you can't replace us now, so we don't want to be naked anymore." Like, but when you're telling me I got to be naked to be in this show, I'm like, okay. But if once I got the role, I could start saying, "No, I don't want to be naked." I mean, Emilia Clarke, perfect example. She was naked the first few seasons. She's like, "No more of that," and Black Sails, another example. Black Sails had more sex in the first 5 episodes than probably the entire 4-season run. And I know there's more examples out there, but you guys probably know what I'm talking about, so I don't think I need more examples.
But Lauren Hisrich is a pretty good communicator, and I think that she also takes a lot of feedback from the community, and that was something that people were definitely talking about, and it looks like they're going to address it. So, I mean,
yeah, and I'm not saying that like nudity is like it's wrong to have it in the show. Like Yennefer and Geralt have sex a lot, and that's great because it's part of their dynamic and whatever. Geralt sometimes has sex with anything that moves, which is part of his dynamic, but like, yeah, I guess what I'm saying is scenes like this where it's really more about the magic than it is about like anything sexual. It's like it's something that I would hope that it would be less.
Ryan Byrne says sex. Okay, now that we have your attention, here's the story.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I was getting at. Well said, Ryan. Before fall. So let's talk about this a little bit. There's just more. This is something I noticed, like really focusing on this White Flame stuff. It's just everywhere that I didn't realize it was everywhere. Because more than half of my Witcher brain is in book canon. So I think maybe this is something that's going to happen with Istredd too. While wandering about kind of aimless, this is when Yennefer is seeking purpose in life. She goes back to Istredd and is like, hey, maybe we should fire it up again. And it doesn't go very well. But that's not what I'm getting at. I'm getting at the part is he's like, hey, it's great to work for Nilfgaard. I get to research all these do all these excavations. And he's talking about the prophecy, though. He's like, this thing I'm excavating gives us information on the prophecy, the White Flame prophecy. So, and he says so it's basically framed as part of his loyalty to Nilfgaard is that they're investigating this prophecy and doing these things that have been sold to them as important, or that certain wizards or other people think is important. So they're really adding that up a lot more. And I think that's interesting. So it may not be just like people like Kovir and Fringilla that are caught up in it. It may be like Istrid may get really caught up in it too. And as a character that has a much lesser role in the books, there's a lot more room to do stuff with him without us being able to guess or predict or know at all. So that's pretty cool. And I'm just a sucker for fantasy archaeology, so just like anything that touches on like ancient
mythology,
excavations and all that, I'm my eyes, I perk up. I'm like, ooh, what's this? So I thought that was really neat.
Ancient civilizations, mythology, anything relating to that, connecting to.
Yeah, man. That's my jam.
Any ancient knowledge, man.
Oh my god, I have such a book series for you guys.
Oh.
Yeah, A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan.
Oh, okay. I've never heard of it.
It's basically like, it's really good. It's basically like dragonology. If dragons existed in Victorian times, the people were like, let us try and study these creatures. And like, there's also archaeology and ancient civilizations. And
Dragons are exquisite.
By the way, speaking of dragons and alternate places with dragons, the actor who plays Artorius, Fringilla's uncle, he was in the movie. He was in the #1 all-time post-apocalyptic dragon film, which is Reign of Fire.
Love that movie.
The only post-apocalyptic dragon film. No, it's the #1 post-apocalyptic dragon film of all time.
Matthew McConaughey is such an
he's so hilarious in that movie. Yeah, I am fond of that movie, even though I can't go around recommending it, but I'm unusually fond of that movie, despite it being not that.
It's just so over the top.
Weird. It is strange, but I do. Anyway, let's not talk about it. But I appreciate some of the things it did outside of the main plot that made the world feel kind of authentic and all that. But anyway, definitely off topic.
As we usually do. So
we're good at that, So Ciri her part of the adventure is her former friends try to kidnap her. People that she was playing dice with. Those people try to like sell her for ransom, which I think is in the books also, or at least is referred to like off page. Maybe I forget exactly. And she starts to like have her prophecy ramblings again. She does her falls into a trance and is basically saying some of the exact same things Kovir said last episode, in episode 6, like the white flame, the time of contempt, this time of sword and axe and all that is like, oh boy. So that's coming out. It really broadcasting all that stuff. So that's pretty interesting. And then on the Geralt side of things, we see it's kind of a flashback to just before the Banquet stuff, where he sees the army coming. He sees them marching. He realizes he has to act because of the loss of prize. And that's where we find out that Geralt was there all along. He was in prison. Calanthe had captured him and stashed him away rather than allowing him to run off with Ciri. And then, of course, as she's dying, she changes her mind. And that's when we get the scene. This is also from the books where she tries to lie to Geralt about what happened, and it doesn't work because he sees Ciri like playing dice, and that connects the dot when Ciri is playing dice in that first episode, and she looks and there's nobody there, and she's like, what was that? It kind of connects all that. So that's kind of cool. It like ties together a lot of the confusing timeline elements. This episode and the next one do a lot of that.
We get the intro of fake Ciri, which I hope they bring back.
That's true. So I think this one hews pretty well to, despite other than the stuff we just went over, it hews very well to what's the purpose of Sword of Destiny, which is, even though it's very different in terms of it's not in Brokilon, it doesn't involve Eithne, it doesn't involve like a lot of these, Ciri doesn't meet Geralt yet. Because in the books, obviously, Ciri and Geralt meet twice. He rejects her, runs away, and then they meet again. And he's like, all right, I really can't deny it this time. I just keep running into her in the most random places. I guess this Destiny stuff is real. So Geralt needs a little more convincing in the books.
It's interesting that they discluded that, and I think that was the biggest gripe from the whole community for season 1. I think this was the biggest talked about thing that was not included in season 1, because it creates a bigger contrast, because Geralt decides it's instead of Geralt just running to Ciri at the end of the season, there's this conflict before that, right? So
Yeah.
we're missing that, but I'm interested to see how maybe they'll create some more conflict in the first couple of episodes before they get to Kaer Morhen or something like that to kind of make up for that. I agree. Yeah. So because I think that obviously Ciri being with Geralt for a grain of truth will be interesting, and that's something that doesn't happen. So we'll see what happens and what kind of how they make up for that. But I think they'll do a good job.
I think they tried to replace it with like Mousek's like really heartfelt warning, which you know takes the place of some of that, followed by Geralt himself being the one to witness the Nilfgaard army coming, which is like, oh, he's like, oh damn, whoops. So yeah, so it kind of hits him from a different angle, rather than he gets destiny is confirmed to him through different means than 2 encounters with Ciri. So it's just, you know, they decided to vary it up a little bit, which is fine. I don't have any problem with that change. But I respect that other people didn't like it as much. I don't have anything else for that episode. What about y'all?
I just want to kind of add, it was cool to kind of go back again, get a little bit more flashback, get to see some of these great characters that we won't be seeing in the future. And yeah, it just gives kind of better insight into the past.
Oh, actually, there is one other important thing in this episode. We have the introduction of Vilgefortz, and there's more of the council, because this is when Artorias is around again, and they're actually making big decisions. This is when Yennefer is brought back into politics, but it's not just boring politics. It's war between Nilfgaard and Cintra, and the council is deciding how to proceed, what side to take. And none of them have really talked about the White Flame stuff. They did bring up the Curse of the Black Sun, which I thought was interesting, because it's like a counter. It's like which is not done in the books very much. And I think this is a smart choice, because they're like, look, you got Stragobor, this guy who's been introduced as a sort of a BS propagandist about, or a sketchy reciter of prophecy. He's like, maybe this Curse of the Black Sun stuff, maybe this is somewhat bull. Maybe Stragobor is exaggerating, right? So framing that with this White Flame stuff, it makes it interesting. Like, oh, maybe this is going to be framed as kind of bull bird also, or exaggerated. So I don't know if that's what they're going to do. But having that character be so prominent and having that be mentioned to say is like, what? Tired of locking up, too many princesses locked up in towers for you or whatever, something like that. And he's like, he doesn't say anything. But it's very similar. And I like that they draw this connection out, because the books don't really, they don't need to. The books doesn't need to do that. But it's nice that they are doing it here, because it's more, they're clearly trying to make the prophecy stuff bigger earlier.
Anthony has a great point. I love context building in the show. It makes understanding history easier in the long term. I definitely agree with that.
Well said. Yeah.
And I guess we're moving on to much more. The final
the most similarly named, I guess, much more to something more, right? A quick summary. Geralt and Ciri they meet, of course. He has the same flashbacks that he has in the book version, with seeing his mother, but I think they hit harder. Having actors do these lines, having his little child Geralt being like, "Mama," is like, ooh, that makes it painful. You know what I mean?
And you see Henry Cavill going through his like fever dream. And him
good acting really makes this all work better, I think. Yeah, like this is the kind of stuff that an author struggles to capture. The talented actor,
because there's a physicality to it that you can actually see, right?
Yeah, so this is super good. Yeah. And that's Yoren. Yurga is Yoren, if y'all missed it. That's the same actor playing Yoren. Yay. Sorry, Michal, go ahead.
Oh no, I'll just say, like, I think what I love about this is that ultimately it's about people helping each other. It's about Yennefer deciding to help, the non-magical population and all of the wizards who participated at the Battle of Sodden, and it's about Geralt helping Yurga and Yurga helping Geralt, and the way that comes together in Ciri. So yeah, I think that was very well framed in this episode.
I agree.
Plus, it was really satisfying to see Yennefer just like finally cut loose, because you don't think of her as restraining herself so much. Like, she doesn't seem like someone who's keeping herself in a box, but then once kind of Tissaia suggests that she has been, it's kind of like, oh yeah, you're right, actually.
This is I hate to reference Game of Thrones. This is a big fucking Dracarys moment. It's so sick.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's so sick.
So we all throughout this episode, I've been mentioning that there's a lot of things that were actually off screen in the books. This is the headliner, though. The Battle of Sodden Hill was not in the books on screen. It certainly happened in the books. It's a huge deal in the books as well as it is here, but it does not happen on page. The entire battle has already happened while Geralt's just in the cart, going toward Yorga's farm. So yeah, seeing it, you're right. Like, seeing Yennefer cut loose is one of the best parts of it. Yennefer, her pathos, like, she's so aimless. She doesn't have kids. She doesn't have relationships. So she's kind of ready to die for the cause, so to speak. She's got a purpose here to, like, stop Nilfgaard or what have you. And also, like, from anyone who's read the books, that fire magic is kind of a big deal. It's a little bit more scary and uncontrollable than the other forms of magic. And when, like, Yennefer is teaching Ciri, minor spoiler, she's teaching Ciri, she's like, that's the one you don't mess with. Like, you start with earth and then water and air, and she basically doesn't broach the subject of fire at all. It does come up.
It's real chaos magic, as I would describe it. That's real.
Yeah. So that's, and of course Nilfgaard is throwing fireballs at them too. So with a lot more cost to the wielder over there on that side. So anyway.
Yeah, I'll say the Battle of Sodden is also, like, it's genuinely scary.
Yeah.
Because, like, you really get this, like, oh my god, this is like a fanatical onslaught, and it's not in, like, that kind of battle in, like, the Lord of the Rings would be against, like, orcs or something, which is plenty scary and really effective, but, like, they're not human. So, like, to have that coming from very recognizably human people, and to have people like Fringilla and Kovir, like, kind of leading that, it was really, like, the part where the whatever magical brainworms, like, take over the a couple people in the fortress or whatever. Like, I found that genuinely really upsetting, because it's like, that's exactly what you don't want to happen, is, like, to have your own people turned against you.
I dare say we say that it's evil. If you think about it, there's necromantic elements about it. Like, sacrificing your life to cause destruction is, like, that's pretty evil, man. Like, you're giving up your life to kill other people. Like, that's pretty fucked up. That's
talk about fanaticism. Yeah. Like, oof. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I also found just, like, the scene where Triss is trying to grow a gateway with, a wooden gateway with the vines was just really powerful too. Like, the way she's struggling and they're hacking at it is just, like, really frantic and like, just captured the energy of how desperate that situation was. And yeah, I just thought it was really good. It was really strong. Like, I'm not usually, battle scenes, they're cool, but, like, a lot of times I'm like, that was good. But yeah, no, this had more than that. This was better than your average battle scene. And I'm not talking about just action. Yeah, it was much more. Even the, like, that, I don't know where it was filmed, or if it was CGI, but, like, the big deep ravine where the castle, like, blocked that passage that is cool looking. Yeah. Really good.
I actually really hope I'm glad you brought up Triss, because I really hope they kind of give a little more sunlight to some of the complicated stuff that happens there, like her name being on the plinth, but she's, whatever. And kind of the implications that a lot of that is psychological, and that literally don't come into play until literally, like, the last 2 chapters of the books.
Yeah.
Yes, completely. So I would love to see a little more of that, because I love the actress. I think she looks beautiful and very, like, spring-like,
Yeah, I agree. There's also a moment. Oh shoot, I think I forgot what I was going to say. Dang it. I lost it.
I'm not alone.
You're not. We're there. I'm there with you. Lost takes. For all the lost takes that go. Yeah. It's interesting too. A fun thing, even though Geralt has such a big moment, Ciri and Geralt's meeting is well done and powerful. It's kind of unusual that that is sort of second fiddle to this huge battle. So it's like this main character, the two of the three main characters have their own little thing going on, this sort of squishy moment where there's this giant battle that's taking up most of the most of the screen and action and attention of it all. It's kind of neat that Geralt, the Witcher, is not in this battle, you know. Neither is Ciri, although they're fighting over territory that is very relevant to Ciri's homeland still. And that's not, I definitely don't want to give any spoilers, but it's not the only time that The Witcher is going to make a bold choice about having major events that don't necessarily involve many or any major characters, just having them be important without the main characters being involved. And Sapkowski takes chances that other authors don't take. And I don't know how big a chance they are. I'm not an author. I don't know how risky such a thing is, but I do recognize it as different because I've read plenty of books and don't see this kind of thing that often. It's one of the things I like about this series. Similar, but different.
There's a lot to like.
Yeah. What were some of the things you guys thought were like the biggest changes? I'm sure there's plenty of things we could point to. I mean, a lot of that is just
Brokilon for sure.
Yeah, Brokilon's a big one. Just from an overall perspective, like I think just to restate, I think it's interesting that there was usually with an adaptation, things get cut. There's too much. You can't do it all. And that did happen here in some cases, but they also just added a lot of things. A lot of things that were short in the books were fully expanded in the show, and that's unusual. And that's cool because like you get two versions of the canon. Well, in The Witcher, there's like 5 versions of the canon if you take the different games and the card game and the other show and all that. So anyway, but setting that aside, that's one of the things I like when you're exploring, when you have multiple adaptations. It's cool when you cover different ground because, hey, you get to cover different ground. You see different angles from things. You get to see more. Like it would be kind of boring if it was the exact same thing, but just with actors. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to change too much because then it's like not the same story anymore. But we certainly leveled some criticisms, but I think overall I give it very high marks, not more than 4 marks, unless it's 4 out of 5. That might be about right. But
we've talked about this a couple times, Aziz. We thought that this was kind of like a nice way to set up the Witcher story, but I think season 2 is good. I'm not going to say it's going to be much better than season 1, but I think it's going to be much more popular after season 2 with all the political elements, introductions of new characters, with less time jumps and more kind of I don't want to say linear story, but linear story.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah, it should be more linear.
Overall, thumbs up from everyone.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we're here talking about it, so we must like it.
Yeah, Macrofag brings up a point that I have in our notes here too. The stuff about the change stuff to Aretuza, like it's not really changed, more of filled in the blanks, like the eel stuff and the failed students and a lot of that stuff isn't a change from the book so much as an addition. It's just not, Sapkowski just doesn't cover it at all. It's a little odd. I don't dislike it, but I wouldn't say it was my favorite either. But I do like that they show this like attention to power and focusing on how they justify things through power, just like politicians will. Not because I think it's good. It's not. It's very unethical, but it's realistic. Just like politicians would abuse the people below them, or kings and queens would think very little of the people under their boot. Sorcerers, yeah, we hear them take these vows and not use their weapon, not use their magic for bad things, but we know they do. I mean, we got a freaking magical assassin with some magic bug creature he created. So obviously there's rogues out there, if not lots of them. So yeah, which is something also I think they just do more of in the show. The mechanisms of magic, the cost of power is made a little more clear, both in a literal way, like exercising of power, and in a exercising of magic, you know, like different types of power there. What about changes to Geralt? You guys have anything to say on that? Like one note I have here is Geralt's inner monologue is a pretty important part of the books, just like any adaptation. That's a challenge for the screen, for the showrunners to take an inner monologue and find ways to express that with an actor. So you have to have facial expressions. You have to have Geralt going and book, and things like that. Like, you got to do the best you can, but that's just something that always gets, we just have to accept there's going to be some loss there based on it gets made up later. Like we said, like the child's voice and the acting of really moving moments, we get that instead. So,
I think we kind of, especially with Geralt, we get treated to more of like the way people in the books actually interact with him, whereas like I feel like, not that he's like, he doesn't think or narrate like excessively in the books, but we definitely get a lot more of his internal monologue, like you were saying. And I think, so we have more context to when Jaskier is like, come on, dum-dum, like, start talking, like,
yeah.
I think this shows us a little more of that. And I think, the idea, I assume, would be that Geralt will share more of his, like, I think when the trailer came out, I said something like, he's literally spoken more in this trailer than he has in the entire first season. So yeah, I mean, I think he'll open up from time to time, and maybe some things will happen to make him shut down again, and that that's also more good character tracking.
I think I agree with you. I think what they did was early in the season he had more dialogue, and that's something that we talk about a lot in our coverage of the short stories. Is we really like how dialogue heavy The Witcher is in general. There's so much dialogue. There's so many conversations, interesting conversations about philosophy, about ethics, about the exercise of power. It's great.
Story.
Yeah, it's so meta, like stories within stories. It's super good, and they captured some of it, but I think it did fall off as the season went on. Like, Geralt had really interesting conversations with Renfrey. He had some interesting, maybe brief conversations with Foltest and Triss and a few others. But then, yeah, as the season goes on, it gets a little more into the like resolving the story to get it in the place it needs to be to move forward, tying all these major world events, bringing Yennefer's stuff together, Ciri and Broccolon. Like, Geralt's just not a part of that, So he's not having conversations with these people. He's not having conversations with some of these things. So yeah, so I'm with you guys. I want more of that, but I'm very optimistic that we will. In fact, I believe Henry Cavill even said in an interview that he's going to have more dialogue and they're going to bring more of his inner monologue out. They specifically made a point of that. So hopefully they succeed.
Yeah, one thing I'll just say about that is, like, as we've noted before, these books are written by someone who just does not give a fuck about format or like convention or like whatever. So and as people who are making a television show for Netflix, you have to give a fuck. So it's a very delicate balance to draw there.
Well said. Yeah, you're right. They have to add structure where there wasn't structure. It's just, yeah. I mean, each episode has to sort of have a beginning, middle, and end. It has to have some theme to it. They have to be episodic. We kind of sort of said that's the beginning, but yeah, just to restate that importance. But as they get farther into their own material and, they're going to draw it back into the books here and there, they're going to have to make a few more of their own changes, but they'll always come back to what's in the books too. So I guess that's where I would leave it. I would say I'm very, very excited for what they're going to do. I think Lauren Hissrich, I don't necessarily agree with all of her changes, but I think she gets it, very clearly gets it. She's clearly a real fan of the books. And what I mean real fan, I don't mean that in like a gatekeeping way. I mean that she genuinely likes them. Like, this wasn't like an opportunity for her to advance her career. She's a fan of the novels and wanted to do a good job, and I think a lot of that comes through.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I will say, I mean, not to like preemptively apologize on behalf of the show, but I do think we do have to keep in mind that this was filmed over like a year and a half because of COVID and had to stop several times, and like, so I'm kind of like, I'm actually, this conversation got me a lot more hyped just, in the run up to it. But I do also feel like we have to be like, okay, it's possible that there will be things that seem wonky or weird, and it's just because they're trying to make a TV show during COVID, and like, that's just the reality of it.
True. Like, basically, if you see a crowd that should be a bigger crowd,
Everyone's standing 6 feet apart.
yeah. Like that happened on the show Foundation. Like no spoilers, but like there's a scene where a bunch of people are shooting at a crowd, and then it's like the bullets are just hitting the ground, and there's just no one there anymore. It's like, where'd everybody go? It's like, oh, COVID. That's where they went.
A lot of reason for optimism. I think that's where we leave it.
Yes.
Thumbs up.
Greater
Thank you everyone
budget,
for
greater fans.
Yeah, a lot of more budget, a lot more story to tell, and it's been 2 years. I think people really want to see it, so it'll be good. So yeah, that's our season 1 recap, review, breakdown, analysis of The Witcher season 1 on Netflix. Of course, we're going to be doing some content when The Witcher season 2 drops, so you're going to make sure you can go check that out. If you go into the link in the description of the video, you can see our podcast, anchor.fm, the podcast surprise. You can find all of our podcast episodes there. We've covered the first 2 books, and we have a couple of special episodes, and we're going to have some great content coming up. So if you want to learn more about The Witcher, I feel like our podcast is the place to go to learn about it, because we got some awesome topics that we discuss, talk about fairy tales, all sorts of influences that Sapkowski is down with. And yeah, let's really go into it.
Can I give another happy confession? I have now listened to Blood of Elves again. I just finished it yesterday for the now, I think, 6th time. So I'm really getting in there. One day I'll just be able to recite it from memory.
Hell yeah.
No, I hope I actually don't get that far in,
but you can find the link to these 2 awesome people's content in the description of the video. History of Westeros, Aziz. Michal does awesome running. Aziz makes awesome content. If you guys haven't checked these 2 people out, make sure you do. We're all going to be collaborating together, of course, on The Witcher Season 2. We never did any Witcher Season 2 show content, but we will be doing that, plus podcast episodes. We're going to have some sort of format. We'll have some sort of updates for you. Make sure you follow us on social media, the Pod of Surprise on Twitter, or you can join our Facebook page if you haven't checked us out there.
Yeah.
The Podcast of Surprise on Facebook. We have awesome conversations there. We have all of our updates and that kind of thing. So come join us. Come join our community and come hang out. We're all chill.
And check out Kyle's stuff. He shouted us out. We got to shout him out. You're doing some great Marvel coverage, and I know there's so many big shows. And
well, I haven't done much lately.
What to cover, but yeah.
It's
coming. It's coming.
It's coming. I'm in the process of moving right now. Everybody, guys. But good news. I'm hiring a full-time editor for the channel to take a little bit of weight off me. So we're going to have lots of Witcher Season 2 videos. This is very exciting. Full-time video editor. So that'll be cool. You're going to be getting all the Witcher episode breakdowns, which is going to be fun. And yeah, so that'll allow me to move and also make content at the same time, because I'm waiting. My new place is being renovated right now as I'm moving.
Right.
So
yeah, good luck with that, Kyle. Good luck.
I'm currently in an Airbnb right now, but it's super comfy and cozy here. So thank you everyone for joining. Everybody that made donations, of course, that goes without saying. Everybody that supports us on the Pod of Surprise. I do see people like Rob and other people. I believe Ryan's another supporter of ours in the chat.
Yeah, I got the list right here.
You got the list? Perfect. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you to Marcella L, Maura Ann, James G, Ryan B, Barry W, Lucas M, Robert B, Elsie, and Amy L. We appreciate your support. You guys rock. We'll keep them coming. Here's to more content.
And if you do want to support us, $1, $5, and $10 option, whatever you choose. If you don't want to do that, hit the like button, comment. All of that stuff helps with getting us out there. We're trying to grow our community and make the best Witcher content we can. We like hanging out with you guys. It's a great community.
In the run up to the show, like when people are going to start getting more hyped for The Witcher, let them know we're a good source.
Yeah.
Spread the word, people. We appreciate it. Thank you much.
Pass a follow to your podcasters, oh Valley of Plenty.
We're trying to attract Joey Beatty. Remember, not scare him away. Just kidding.
I think we'll end it with that because that's pretty funny. Thanks for joining us, everyone. You guys have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday night.